We can get started. So I'm Crystal. I work for Blameless, and this is Matt Dodge. He's a senior customer success manager at Blameless. And today we're going to go over retrospectives. Matt, will you give a quick introduction and just tell us about your role and if you want to get into the presentation?
Sure. Thank you, Crystal. Hi, welcome everyone to the Show Me Demo series. This is episode 2. For anyone interested in watching others in the series, you can find our first episode 1, which is on the topic of incident management. And that's in the resources library section of our website under the webinars tab. We'll add some additional kind of links and collateral later for your review or for your knowledge, for your access. So my name is Matthew Dodge. I'm a senior customer success manager here at Blameless. I help customers adopt Blameless platform to improve their service reliability for their end users, right? My goal is to help users become more resilient and be highly efficient when managing incidents. The best part of my job is seeing that reduction in toil, right? Seeing the reduction in the manual efforts, reducing hours off incidents, especially when doing the retrospective and sharing what happened, right? So today's topic is that retrospective. Do we need them and why? And the simple answer to that question is yes, right? For the next few minutes or next 20 minutes or so, I hope to share and hopefully convince you why you need retrospectives and kind of our view in Blameless and how we approach it from a product standpoint, and some best practices kind of along the way. So again, thanks for taking time out of your schedule to join us. Here's a little more about what I like to cover. So we're talking about, with the retrospective process, we're talking about how to give engineers and on-call teams the power to close incidents, communicate after the fact, and actually learn from the incident. So we have a saying here at Blameless, we say failure is inevitable. So incidents will happen, but the challenge becomes, how do you manage those incidents? And then how do you also have that look back, and how do you take those learnings and apply them to what's going on now and mitigation and prevention of future occurrences and things like that. So when we talk about the retrospective process, we're talking about avoiding headaches, saving time, and sharing what's relevant to unique stakeholders. So we've definitely designed it in such a way to give the on-call or the incident responders that full control or agency to close out the incident and communicate clearly what happened, right? Ultimately, everyone learns and better understands along the way. And when teams are triaging and debugging in an incident, really the last thing they want to think about is all the steps and the moving parts in the run book, taking actions to escalate, documenting what's occurring. So we have a lot of functions to help with those things. So I'll talk about how we give teams time back, how we automate important steps and documenting the most important actions and follow-ups. So that's really what we're talking about when we talk about the retrospective process. To take a step back and clarify and kind of define this a little bit, what's a retrospective, also known as a post-mortem. Post-mortem is a little bit of an outdated term. We're actually moving away from that term internally. So you'll hear me say retrospective a lot, and I'll say post-mortem probably less. Right now in the application and the product, it still says post-mortem, but we're working towards changing that in all the areas where it appears. But Steve McGee, he did a guest blog post for us. He spent quite a bit of time at Google as an SRE, and now he's an advocate for SRE teams. A quote from him: "A what happened narrative with graphs is the best textbook for teaching other engineers how to get better at progressing through future incidents," right? So this is what we're talking about. The reality is that on-call teams change over time, and new engineers join, plus your services and your offerings are going to change with your new releases, and new users as you grow and scale your business. So this is kind of organic. Things are changing, things are in flux, especially if you think about kind of the startup environment, moving quickly and things like that. So you need to capture these learning moments, and when you do that, all teams are going to rise by the fact that you're capturing that, and you have that historical record, you have the documentation and things like that. So you can actually learn from that, rather than, if you think about life without this, it's, we had an incident, we handled it, we moved on. And so that's very isolated, and that's very kind of, it's treating it kind of as a single unit. With Blameless, we feel like having that record is really important, not just of the incident, but also when you're doing that retrospective as well. So before we dive into the demo, just talk a little bit about best practices here. So this is really a chance to kind of look back. So the first thing you need to do is decide when to do a retrospective, right? Common thoughts around this are, do you do this kind of always? Do you do it never? Do you do it under specific circumstances, right? Of course, you always want to acknowledge that there was an incident, and then there's a retrospective that takes place, right? The history of the incident helps us learn, right? For minor incidents, you might decide to skip this, right? If you have a ton of low severity incidents and you're following a really good practice or a process of spinning up incidents, even if it's a minor interruption, that's great. But at the same time, you might not have the time or the opportunity to do retrospectives for all those incidents, right? So I think the first step is really that documentation of kind of when you do the retrospective. And then it really depends on your environment, right? The maturity of the services, the team, how regularly you're pushing your releases. So there's a lot to consider there. We always kind of push the kind of the more documentation you have, the better, but it's definitely understandable that doesn't really fit into everyone's workflow to do a retrospective for every single incident of every severity, right? Another part of this, the next part of this is that the visuals, adding visuals in this kind of tells a more complete story, right? Sharing any dashboard charts, screenshots, things like that is really going to help provide that extra layer for future team members that want to kind of go back and decipher this, understand what took place. It can really help kind of cut to the chase, especially if they're already familiar with the environment. Like, oh yeah, I understand that area of the, sorry, I moved my mouse. I understand that area of the application. I understand that logging and things like that. So, and then really the next part is the timeline. So the timeline replays what happened and when, not all details, right? So a big part of Blameless is the events timeline that we offer as part of the incident. And I'll show this in the demo, but the events timeline that happens in the incident, that carries over to your retrospective when you're working on that report and when you're having that meeting, right? So you want to aggregate how long an incident took from start to finish. This is really useful as the organization and your services mature and evolve. Timelines really tell a strong story. So we want to make sure that we're capturing all those major touch points along that path and capturing those major decision points, like the critical contextual aspects of what happened during the incident management. We allow you the opportunity to capture those as you're managing the incident, and then as you go forward when you're managing that retrospective as well. And then timing is really important, right? You want to promptly share, you want to be transparent, you want to do this when you're fresh in your mind. Obviously, we wouldn't suggest immediately after the incident is resolved. You want to give a little bit of kind of time to clear your head and then be able to look back a little bit, but not too much, right? So you want to still have this be fresh in everyone's mind. People get really busy. People tend to move on, kind of mentally moving on. It's hard to accomplish if you're a smaller and really busy team. So making time to do this and stressing the importance of taking time to do this and being really honest and transparent, and of course being blameless, right? We always say be blameless in these opportunities. We don't say that as a person's fault. We say that that's a process fault, something with a process or something with a product, something went wrong, and how do we manage it, right? Last but not least, really, this is telling a story of what happened and giving context, especially for stakeholders who may not have lived through the experience, right? So anyone should be able to read and understand what occurred. Me personally, I've been doing some of these retrospectives this week for incidents that we resolved last week. And it really is putting myself in that mindset of saying, okay, if someone else is going to come along and read this, what are the key points to understand, and how can this be written in such a way that you can follow along and say, okay, here was the start, here were some steps that were taken to resolve, and then here was the actual code fix or resolution, and then having the timeline to go along with that and the visuals to go along with that is really helpful. Okay, so we can jump into the live demo. So give me a second here. I'm just going to drop out of this presentation and I'll go into our user interface here. So starting here, this is actually the incident record. I wanted to start here because we show that the incident is created, and then for one of the things that we do as an automated step is every time you create an incident, we create a post-mortem that's associated with it, just kind of automatically, right? And going over to that, so we won't spend too much time in the incident, but going over to the postmortem, because that's what we're focused on today. If you want to learn more about incident stuff, we do have the other episode in this series where we talked a little more about the incidents, right? So again, the reverse is also true. You can link back to that incident if you're in the postmortem, right? So we can maintain that connection. We have a couple of different states here, whether or not it's assigned, approved, things like that, right? So you can work through if you have a review process, if you have an approval process, right? And then the final step is published or not required. Like we spoke about earlier, if it's a lesser severity incident, you might decide that's not required and you don't need to publish a postmortem, right? Created at the time of the incident creation. And then this owner, typically this would start out as unassigned. I've taken this step already prior to this to assign myself as the owner. And like I said about the events timeline, that's just copied over here in the sidebar. So you have that as a reference right away. So you don't need to worry about jumping back and forth between the incident, right? You have all that contextual information here. And then there's really two major sections of the postmortem that we offer: overview and analysis. This kind of starts in overview, but I'm going to go to analysis. I'm going to go a little bit out of order because it's a little bit easier to kind of explain this one pretty quickly. So the analysis is really just your free-form text editor, right? These headings are default. There's a setting for these and you can change these to what you want. But there's just some typical examples here, right? What happened? What was the environment? What were the symptoms? What was the assessed problem? Some of those headers we have in our postmortems that we do are: what's the synopsis? What's the technical analysis? What's the customer impact? Things like that, right? So this can be whatever you want it to be. And again, this is free form. You can just type in here, right? What happened? Something went wrong. You could just type, right? And then you have some style options here: bold, underline, things like that. So it's typical kind of what you would expect from a text editor. This also supports multiple editors. So if you're having your postmortem meeting or if more than one person is doing this kind of asynchronously, it doesn't kick you out if somebody else is doing edits at the same time. We're saving those in line. So that's super helpful in terms of that kind of collaboration, right? We want to definitely foster that and encourage that collaboration, right? So once you have the analysis, you have your text, edited, and this isn't a state that you'd like. Typically, I'll use this as a reference as well, right? If I'm looking at what happened, technical analysis, things like that, customer reported symptoms, this will all be captured as part of the incident timeline, incident record. We'll capture those things out of the Slack channel that's created, right? And we talk about that a little bit in incident management. We have a method to use an emoji to capture text, important text. So I did that here for this incident. And then also we can capture images as well. So again, talking about images, telling the story, those visuals, the impact of those visuals is really helpful. So that's a screenshot of an error right there that helps. We also have these timestamps, right? When the incident was created, right? The incident creation is the start of the customer impact. When the state was changed in terms of managing the incident throughout, right? We started investigating, we moved to identified. So again, that's this timeline being here, that saves you the trouble of having to go back and look in the Slack channel or having to go back and look in the incident to understand kind of what happened when. And then you can really use this. And then if you are having a meeting, if you are having a postmortem kind of meeting around this as well, then that's conversation, right? Did we capture everything we were supposed to? Can we go back to the Slack channel because it's still available, right? We don't actually close that Slack channel or archive that Slack channel until the postmortem is marked as published. So, do we need to add more context here in order to, out of the Slack channel to be able to have a more comprehensive postmortem, right? And then in the overview section, so there's an example of something here called custom questions, and this you can set this up in your account. Custom questions. So we have the summary that's kind of copied over from the name of the incident, the name of the postmortem, so that's there. And these custom questions, you can set this up kind of how you want it, but here's an example just to show you. Things like the start date, right? Things like who was impacted, what was the detection source, was this caused by a recent change, was one or more factors already a known issue, could that monitoring have been better, right? Could this have been prevented, could this have been caught in testing? Different type of questions like that, right? Was this incident attributed to the correct team, right? And then you have kind of yes, no buttons, and then you have kind of some text boxes as well. And once that's set up, that's super easy to just kind of edit. You can go in here and you just check them off, and then you can save that text if you have that text box and you're typing a kind of a short answer there, and then just save that, and that gets applied here, right? So again, not having to think about what questions need to be asked, but more presenting those questions when we're going through this process of completing the postmortem, is another way that can be automated. It's another way you can kind of reduce the time spent. You can reduce the cognitive effort as well. And then really, other than that, there's just some other areas here of interest. These timestamps that we show over here, in terms of when the incident was created, we consider that the start of customer impact, but sometimes, it's reported prior to the incident creation. So we do give you some options to edit those timings, right? Start of the customer impact and the end of the end of the incident impact as well, right? So we're giving you the control to have the most accurate and up-to-date information as you're going through and you're looking at that, you're doing that analysis, you're doing that overview of the postmortem in your retrospective process. And another thing is tags, right? We can capture tags during the incident in Slack. We can capture tags in the incident page in the UI, which I showed, but then also part of our process is to make sure that before we publish that we have all the correct tags. So things like the alerting source, contributing factor, things like that, the customer that was affected, the group or the product, things like that. And what that helps you with is another area, which we won't talk about today, but we do offer another area with metrics. We call it reliability insights. Any data point that's in the incident or in the postmortem, whether that's the time stamps, the tags, answers to custom questions, the team involved, all of those data points are captured, and then you can create reporting around that. So if you wanted to have a better understanding in your look back, show me all the incidents that were tagged with a third-party outage as a contributing factor in the last 6 months. Well, now you have this tag here, and now that's a data point, and you can create reporting around that. So there's some really great options as it relates to that, right? We'll see follow-up actions here. This is part of incident management, right? We saw something and we decided to create a follow-up ticket for that. That's part of our Jira integration. So that shows up there as well. That also shows up in the incident page. So there's a lot of parity here between the incident and the postmortem to make sure that you have all the information that you need in order to complete this retrospective. And then root cause analysis, I won't spend too much on this, but this is an exercise we call kind of 5 whys. We're potentially exploring options to move away from this going forward, and have it be less of a single source and more complex, because a lot of times with incidents there's a complexity beyond a single source or beyond a single root cause, I should say. But this is 5 whys. This has kind of been something in the industry for a while. Something happened because something happened. Why did that happen? Because something else happened. And as you go down through that exercise, you can actually get to the root cause. And once you find the root cause, then this little bug can be marked as red. If that bug is marked as red in our application within Blameless, we're saying that's the root cause. And again, for reporting purposes, you can collect that as a data point. So show me all the incidents where the server being down is the root cause over the last year. We have that captured through the use of this function within the postmortem, right? And then, like I mentioned before, once you have your overview complete, once you have your analysis complete, and we feel good about publishing it, you can mark that as published. Published will ask you, are you sure? And they'll tell you the Slack channel will be archived, right? When you publish this postmortem, this is kind of the full completion of the incident, right? Why we don't archive the incident when it's marked as resolved is because of the situation that I mentioned earlier, right? There might be a need to add more context. There might be a need to capture more context. But once we've gone through this process of the retrospective, we feel like publishing this retrospective is the kind of point of completion. And we're saying, okay, we'll go ahead and archive that Slack channel. While we do that is another step to automate, right? You don't have to remember to go back and close out these Slack channels, right? We're helping you out by doing that for you through the function of the Slack bot. So that's everything for the demo part. I'll just jump back over to the slides and I will present that, and then we'll move forward because we have some poll questions that will pop up here in a second with the poll option. So yes, first question, do you typically write a retrospective post-incident, we would present you with answers in that poll of yes, no, or don't know. And then we'll be able to see those responses.
We'll give everyone a few more seconds and then I'll share those polls.
So we see the poll results here. We've got 57% say yes. We do typically do a retrospective post-incident. 29% say no, and 14% said I don't know, right? This is interesting. This is a little bit kind of, I would say, typical. It's typical to see more rather than less. But you know, putting my CS hat on, right? I would talk to the persons that say no or I don't know, and we would kind of talk about why, right? Why or why not? And then, you know, what the, you know, cultural adoption is around that, and what the process is. And, you know, have you thought about exploring opportunities to, you know, change that process or improve that process, things like that. But yeah, interesting answers there. And I think we have a couple other poll questions as well. Let me move forward. So the second one is, do you share the retrospective report outside of the immediate response team, right? It will be yes, no, or I don't know, right? So what we're talking about here is, you know, interested stakeholders, right? Are we sharing this with the customer success team? Are we sharing this with the C-suite? Are we sharing it with, maybe even sharing it with external customers, right? So responses there will say yes 60%, no 40%, and don't know is 0, right? So this is actually another thing that's really interesting. I didn't show this in the demo, but we do have options to share the report outside of the immediate team, right? Within that PM, you can download the report as a PDF. You can send it as an email. You can also download it as Markdown. We also have a function where you can set up an email on a regular basis that will say, hey, every week, send me all completed postmortems to this email. And whether that's 2, 3, whatever, you can set that up on a weekly basis. So we do have some options to export that out to the other teams, as well as keeping teams informed, internal teams informed along the way through things like announcements and things like that. And one more poll question. We have, so when do you conduct a retrospective meeting? So we talked about this a little bit, right? Do you always do a meeting? Do you never do a meeting? We only do the meeting for high severities, or I don't know, right? We see a lot of variance in this from talking to customers about that meeting element of it. What I just showed you in the demo allows for, you know, reporting around it regardless. Like I said, the ones that I've been working on this week, some of them have meetings, some of them do not. But I'm trying to make sure that we have that historical record and we have the data collection of that reporting part of it. And then maybe we decide that we need a meeting after the fact, but you know, typically, I think our process is we definitely have it for the higher severities. We sometimes have it for the lower severities. So everybody's answers could be really different here. Yeah, so I'm seeing the answers come through and we see always 25%, never is 0%, which is good, right? We never do a meeting. I would think that that would be probably a low number of responses. High severity, you see 50% say we only do it at high severity, and then we see 25% are saying I don't know, right? So this is a little bit what I expected in these responses. The high severity ones, 50% say yes, we only do it for high severity, and then we're seeing 25% say we always do it. So that's really, those are some really interesting responses, and we're trying to be flexible on Blameless with, like I said, the reporting, being able to schedule a meeting or not schedule a meeting, have a postmortem, not have a postmortem, so things like that. So that's all we have in terms of the show and tell part and the poll. Thank you for participating and putting those answers in for the poll answers. Really appreciate it. Some good talking points there. Going forward, a useful reading, we have a couple of recent blogs on this topic. So 5 best practices for nailing incident retrospectives, excuse me. And then the secret of communicating incident retros to stakeholders. Our host is adding that into the try now link is being added into the chat. And then the blog links are being added into the chat as well. Because I'm showing you a slide here and you can't really click on that. Question from the chat: what's the best way to share retrospective reports outside of engineering teams? I just touched on this a minute ago, but I think being able to pull that down on the email, or being able to pull that down as PDF and being able to pull that down as Markdown, which one of those options works best for you. Typically, that's what we see, what we use internally, what our customers use as well. I don't know how common this is for the use cases for everyone, but I know our team does a weekly, what we call an incident story time, right? Where we talk about the incidents that have happened over the past week and we do a deeper dive, even beyond the retrospective meeting or beyond the retrospective report. So there's a lot of options there, and we try to provide you options, not only through the product, but then also through process when we talk about best practices and things like that. Another question from the chat: what's the best method to capture action items from a current retrospective? So capturing those items is a function of the Slack bot, right? We'll capture, I'm sorry. I was thinking of contextual incident items. Action items from a current retrospective would be to add those as follow-up action. So I mentioned that earlier in the demo, but we do have within the Slack bot and within the Blameless incident UI, as well as the UI for the postmortems, there's an option we call a follow-up action item, right? We're learning about what could happen to mitigate future occurrences. And then as such, we have a function to create a follow-up action item. Typically that's through Jira. We have a Jira integration. And then as you're talking about it, whether you're talking about it during the incident, whether you're talking about it during the retrospective, you can say, okay, real quick, we'll take a moment. We'll enter a follow-up action item here, and that'll just go and create a Jira ticket. So again, an automated step that can be included in the things you're kind of already doing. Another question, wow. How do you encourage others to read the retros? That's a great question. I feel like that's a little more process than product. I feel like encouragement of reading the retrospectives, I think that's having a culture around kind of the importance of incident management, a culture around, acknowledgement of those efforts, and then a culture around just having that knowledge, right? The operational knowledge for the entire team and saying, hey, something happened, we handled it, here's how, and then being able to share that out through those other methods. We talked about the sharing methods, and then just having that, being able to just talk about that, right? A lot of what we talk about at Blameless is incidents and incident management shouldn't be this kind of black hole where there's this one team that's a small team that's kind of working through these things in isolation, right? It affects a lot of areas of the organization. And so really everyone is a stakeholder in some way or another. So being able to kind of bring that more to the surface and being able to have more persons involved is always a good thing. Any other questions?
All right, so it looks like we're towards the end of this Show Me demo. I just wanted to say thank you, Matthew. I really appreciate you coming on today. Be sure to look at our website. We'll have more Show Me demos coming in the future. Our next one will be next month. So feel free to go on our website under blameless.com and you'll be able to find all of these assets. And feel free to email me if you need crystal@blameless.com. If you need any specific items, I'm willing to help you out there. Matt, do you have any other things you wanted to add for the end of it?
No, I think that's all. I would just reiterate that if you like what you saw today, of course, there's a continued series. Like you said, there's one coming up. There's a previous one. So you can go to blameless.com. You can find those. And then if you want to get your hands on the product, of course, use the try now link that was shared in the chat. And also we are growing and we're hiring across most functions as well. We've got some new people, but we're always excited to see additional new people come on board as well. So.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.